Well, good morning, everybody. This is Dan Sullivan speaking. We've got a number of folks still signing in, so we'll give it another minute or two before we get started. So thanks for joining, and we'll be back with you here in just a minute or two. Thank you. So, everybody, again, good morning. My name is Dan Sullivan. I'm the RVP of the Eastern region for Conducive Technologies, and appreciate your taking the time this morning to join myself and Gary Kwan, otherwise known as GQ, and talking about a very easy yet proactive approach to improve SQL performance with Conducive's patented IO reduction software, Velocity. I mentioned that we have Gary Kwan joining us today. Uh, Gary's otherwise known as GQ. He's our Senior Vice President of Technology Strategy. He holds numerous patents in areas of IO optimization and all of the different technologies that are built into our product. So it's great to have GQ here on the line. He helps keep me honest in any kind of technical discussion. So GQ, are you out there?
Dan, I am out here, and don't let Dan fool you. He's very technically minded, but I'm here to handle any deep dive questions. And Dan, one of the things we do like to do in this session is make it very interactive. So you'll see a Q&A box over there, and anytime during the session or at the end, type in any questions, and we'll either get them answered for you during the session or at the very end. So, and as Dan would say, no question is a bad question. Thanks, Dan.
GQ, you're taking all my lines from me, but thanks. And he is right. We do run these webinars kind of on a monthly basis, and we're always pleasantly surprised at the various numerous questions that we get typed into the question box. Makes it for a very satisfying webinar for you all, and that's what's important here. So again, please add your questions in. And also for attending today after the webinar, you will be receiving a not for resale license of Velocity, a server license for Velocity, and we'll talk about licensing during the webinar. But that's a $525 value for joining and listening to how you can proactively improve. And it's not only SQL, but most, if not all, Microsoft-based applications with our IO reduction software. So again, thanks for joining. Folks, you may know us in our past life. We were the Diskkeeper Corporation. We've been in business over 38 years, 12th oldest software company in the world. And Diskkeeper was the preeminent disk defragmentation software product, sold over 100 million copies of Diskkeeper. But as you may know, in 2012, the world changed. Virtualization entered onto the scene, and with that, you no longer defrag a SAN or an SSD. And because of that, GQ and its engineering team totally respun our software to where we no longer are a defragmentation solution, but we now, with two light filter drivers, prevent fragmentation from occurring in the Windows OS, in addition to a patented caching engine that learns your applications and caches those reads. It determines our performance degrading. And with those two patented filter drivers, on average, we reduce about 30% of I/O to backend storage. And that 30% plus reduction, in most cases, our customers are seeing a 50 to 300% application performance improvement on their existing hardware, even all flash environments. It's pretty amazing what customers are seeing. And because of that I/O reduction, Gartner named us a cool vendor, said we should be installed in every virtualized initiative. I mentioned our patented caching engine. It's actually OEM by the folks you see here, HP, Lenovo, SanDisk. Actually, 9 of the 10 top PC manufacturers have OEM'd our patented caching engine, and they put it into their workbooks and laptops. You won't see us there because, again, they OEM it from us. But that's quite a testament to how efficient, how lightweight that patented caching engine is. I mean, imagine HP OEMing that from us, given what they could potentially develop. So kudos to GQ and his team for that. Because of what we do and have done for 30 plus years in a Microsoft environment, we're a close partner with Microsoft. Because of the benefits we deliver in a virtualized environment, we're a close partner with VMware. We also recently certified as a Citrix Ready partner for what we do and the performance enhancements we deliver in a VDI environment. And most relevant in part of today's conversation is a recent certification that we achieved with Microsoft called the Microsoft SQL Server I/O Reliability Certification. GQ, you want to talk to the folks a little bit about what you accomplished there?
Sure, Dan, and I consider this a nice elite certification. Microsoft has certain types of these type certification, make sure that third-party products are fully compatible and reliability with their products. And in this case, MySQL Server. Not only did we have to go through some stringent testing, I also had to face a board of SQL experts and answer to them. But we passed with flying colors here, Dan. And just to note that we're the only software vendor to have this certification. But we're in good company with hardware vendors like EMC, Dell, and HP. So it just shows you how concerned we are to make sure we run well with Microsoft's products here, Dan. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, GQ. Congratulations. And by the way, folks, that certification was actually done in an Azure instance. So our IO uh, software runs both on premise and in the cloud. So pretty amazing, again, what GQ and his team have accomplished here. You know, we do a lot of surveying of our customers in the IT environment. And one of the questions we ask, as you can see here, is, do you have any issues with performance in a SQL environment? And with our most recent survey, 28% of the folks said yes, we've got an issue with performance in our SQL environment. And we've done these surveys year after year. That number is actually growing, surprisingly enough. Might have thought it might be declining with the use of Flash and whatever, but we're going to talk to you about why that's not necessarily the real be all and end all solution to performance issues here. And if we look at kind of a word map of the different types of names that have come up in those surveys, as you can see here, SQL is the #1 mentioned application around performance. And interestingly enough, too, 7 of our 10 new customers, 7 out of 10, buy us initially to improve their SQL performance. And then once they use us and see how easy we are to install, how we run in the background, they then expand outside of their SQL environment. So I thought you might be interested in that one fact. So finally, too, from a Citrix standpoint, we recently certified with them, and you can see here, too, that in VDI environments, and not just SQL, we can potentially deliver some real benefits around performance and performance improvements in a VDI and Citrix environment. So I just wanted to sneak that one in on you. Well, we all know that virtualization has been great for server efficiency, but quite honestly, it's been horrendous for I/O performance. And what this slide is depicting is the most efficient I/O environment possible, and one that we help customers achieve. And that is large contiguous writes emanating from the Windows OS, hitting the hypervisor, moving down to storage, and back again. So most efficient environment possible. And this is also true of a physical environment. If you just think of the hypervisor as your physical storage and a physical server, that also is the most efficient environment possible. But as soon as you virtualize, or even in a physical environment, the Windows I/O tax and the I/O blender effect enter into the fray. The Windows I/O tax is true in both physical and virtual environments. It's present in a virtual environment along with the I/O blender effect in the virtual environment. Because what happens as soon as you virtualize, all of these nice, large, contiguous writes are broken up. Windows breaks them up into these small, tiny, random fragments. And those small, tiny, random fragments hit the hypervisor, and they get further randomized by what Gartner has defined, and we help them do this, as the I/O blender effect. And by definition, if you Google it, you'll see it talks about decreasing storage performance and increasing latency. So whether you have flash, hyperconverged as a backend storage environment, it's having to deal with all this small, tiny, random, and unnecessary I/O versus, as with our software, it could look like this. So in this case, where it might take 100,000 I/Os to write a gigabyte of data, with our I/O optimization software installed, it may only take 50 or 60,000 I/Os. So you can appreciate what that might mean around improved performance and increased throughput. GQ, do you have any comments?
Just a few, Dan. And, you know, as you indicated, there's also that, there's the extra processing to have to deal with all these extra small random IOs. But one thing that you may not know is that you, it's also hurting your performance of your storage infrastructure. And the fact that whenever you buy storage, and that could be hard disk drives, that all flash arrays, they give you two benchmarks, random IO and sequential IO. And you'll notice that sequential IO always outperform the random IO. So if we can enforce nice sequential IO to go down to the storage, you're going to get the optimal performance out of your storage. Now you may ask, gosh, why is Windows doing this to start with? Well, just to give you a little background on this, the way Windows file system works right now is that when a file gets created or extended, it doesn't know how big that creation is going to be or that extension is going to be. So on that VM, on the Windows file system, it looks for the next allocation to create or extend that data to. Now, if that allocation isn't big enough, it has to go find another allocation and so forth and so forth. So that's the extra IO because it doesn't know how big it's going to be. And then, of course, when it gets down to the hypervisor, all these VMs, as Dan indicated, you get this IO blender effect. Now, we're talking about virtual systems here, but the same thing happens in physical environments too. Uh, the Windows file system on the physical environments is going to cause that Windows IO tax. And instead of the hypervisor, let's say you have a lot of physical systems going to different LUNs on the same SAN, and you get that same IO blender effect. So this is both on the virtual environment and the physical environment. And then in a few slides later, we'll show you how we prevent this from occurring. Thanks, Dan.
GQ, thanks much. Again, folks, this happens in any and all virtualized environments. So just think about that versus having your environment look like this. So remember too, any questions you've got, please put them in the question box, and we'll get to them as we go along or at the end. And it's also our best practice to optimize all the VMs on a particular host. And the reason for that is depicted here. So whether you have 4, 5, 10, 20 VMs on a particular host, you can optimize one or any number of those VMs. But if you don't optimize all of them, then while you've optimized 1, 2, or some number, the other VMs are still generating all that small, tiny random IO that again gets further randomized after the hypervisor and really takes away from the optimization you provided on that particular VM or set of VMs. And so to that end, we actually have what we call a host license. We don't install on the host. We install on the VMs in the guest OSs. But the host license covers all the VMs that reside on that particular host. So it can be much more cost effective for you using our host licensing model. So I hope that's helped to give you an idea of what some of the best practices are. And where do we sit? As I mentioned, folks, we are 2 filter drivers that sit up in the Windows OS. We're above the hypervisor, servers, HBAs, networks, and any storage device. So if it's compatible with Windows, it's compatible with us. And again, we are optimizing IO at the point of inception on the VM in the OS. GQ, any comments?
No, what's nice about this is, as you indicated, Dan, it's still a Windows IO, but I like to say it's now optimized Windows IO that's coming down. But what's nice where we sit is we're agnostic to the type of hypervisor, the type of application, type of storage, or the network. We work with them all. As long as it worked with Windows before, it's still got to work with Windows with us on there. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Sure. So, folks, if you think of us, we're like a personal trainer to Windows. We're the intelligence that Windows designed 30 plus years ago never got. And so we're not doing the work. We're coaching Windows to provide that large contiguous IO versus the small, tiny random IOs. So what does Velocity do? Again, large contiguous writes for more payload. The DRAM caching that we'll speak about uses idle and available DRAM to cache those reads that it learns are performance degrading, puts them into idle DRAM. You actually create a tier 0 storage environment for you, and you get memory to memory transfer 10 to 15 times faster than flash or SSD. So as I mentioned, any read-intensive applications like SQL, SharePoint, and others, file servers, etc., that can have a lot of I/O and a lot of read I/O can really benefit from this patented read caching engine that GQ and his team have developed. I also mentioned that we happen to run in the background. We actually trademarked the set it and forget it moniker. We beat the Ronco chicken guy to that years ago. Because we do run in the background and there's nothing for you to do after you install us except to view these benefits dashboards that GQ and his team have developed, and we'll show you an example of one to see exactly what it is our software is doing for you. Previous to this, folks are saying, hey, everything's running a lot better than it had been before, but what are you guys really doing? So that's why GQ and his team developed these dashboards. So with that, GQ, I'm going to ask if you talk a little bit more about our 2 patented filter drivers, IntelliWhite and IntelAMemory.
Be glad to, Dan. Our first one that we have here is our what we call our IntelliWrite. And this is, as you can see, instead of all those small random IOs, we enforce a nice sequential IO. And as I indicated before, it's the sequential IOs always outperform the random IO. So you gain the best performance out of your storage, plus you're increasing the bandwidth on your network because it frees it up having to do that extra processing there. Now, how do we do this? I indicated before how when the file system creates or extends a file, it doesn't know how big that's going to be, so it just finds the next allocation, and if it doesn't fit, has to find another one, which causes the extra IOs. What we're doing is that in the background, we're monitoring your system, and over time, we know certain file types or certain applications, when they create or extend a file, how big it's going to be. And we just feed that intelligence back to the Windows file system. So now when a file creation or extension gets created, it looks for the best allocation. And what that means is that it can write out all that creation or extension out in one single IO. So now you get that nice uh, sequential large IO, which is gives you the best performance gain there. Anything to add to that, Dan?
No, that's great, GQ. And how about IntelliMemory?
Now, this is the other one was for writes. And what about the read IOs? And this is where we come with our caching technology called IntelliMemory. Now, there's a couple very unique technologies in here. First is how we use the available RAM. Our caching product, you do not have to go and allocate RAM for the caching. We'll dynamically use what's available on that system. Uh, Available RAM that is not being used by any user or system process, and we'll use that for caching. And if any user or system process needs it, we automatically give it back. So there's never any memory contention issue. So as Dan indicated, we like to make this set it and forget it. Now, what does this cache, and then what does caching do for you? If we can satisfy that IO right there on that machine, that prevents that IO from having to go to the network, down to the storage to get satisfied. So you can see that we can quickly satisfy that IO. And fact is, even if you have all flash array down there, DRAM is usually 10 to 15 times faster than the SSDs. So we're going to satisfy that much quicker. And then also by satisfying it, it doesn't have to go down the network. And again, we're freeing up your network and giving it more bandwidth for other things to occur on there. Now, I mentioned two unique technologies. The first one was how we dynamically use the memory. The second is our unique technology on how to determine what and to keep in cache to get the optimal performance. And that's why, as Dan indicated, 9 out of the top 10 OEM manufacturers license our technology. Now, you don't hear about it because they license under their name, but it's because of this uniqueness. Because many caching products, when a read comes in, a lot of them just says, I'm going to put this read into cache and hope that it's going to be read again. But if it's not, then it's just a waste of that RAM. We take a little longer term approach. In the background, first of all, we're looking at saying what data is getting access the most. So what data is more likely to get read again and again? And that's one factor. The other factor is we know certain patterns of data will give better performance gain than others. So taking those two factors, we determine what to put and keep in cache for optimal performance gains. So that's what's unique about our IntelliMemory caching technology. Thanks again, Dan.
Oh, GQ, thanks for the great explanation. And again, folks, it is pretty amazing the results that people are seeing just by installing our software and benefiting not only from the write optimization, but also from this IntelliMemory read optimization, read caching that we offer. Now, I mentioned that we kind of run it, that we do run in the background, and so GQ and his team put together a set of dashboards that kind of show you exactly what it is happening. This happens to be an example of a system taken over the last 3 weeks, as you see here. And there's a number of different date ranges that it deals with. But GQ, you want to chat about what the dashboard here is showing?
Be glad to, Dan. A lot of times we tell people to measure their performance gains before they put us on the product, on their system. For instance, how long a batch job runs. Another one was how many support calls are you getting on systems because of slowness, and they see those go down, but they really want to see what is your product doing for you. And we put this together to show you, as you can indicate, the total amount of IOs that are getting eliminated. And for instance, with the caching, and it's not being eliminated, it's being eliminated from having to go down to the storage to get satisfied. For instance, with the read IOs, because we're caching them, we can satisfy them right on the system and eliminate from having to go to the network to storage. Same thing with the write IOs. Rather than 100 IOs, we do it in 1 or 2 IOs. So we eliminated, 98 of the IOs from having to go down to the storage to get satisfied. So in this case, you can see that, the read IOs, 64% of them we were eliminating, and 32% of the write IOs, and total amount of IOs. And in this case, it's for the last 3 weeks. But on our dashboard, you can do it from since it was installed, or the last day, or the last week. You have that ability to monitor that. But what does this actually do to you, eliminating those IOs? Well, since we know the latency time of IOs during that time, we can calculate the actual amount of IO time saved by eliminating those IOs having to go into storage. And that's what we're putting down there. Now realize that IOs can happen in parallel. You have the system IOs occurring the same time as user IOs. So sometimes you can see the IO time actually greater than absolute time because we're saving time in parallel there. And then at the very end, you'll see fragments getting prevented and free spaces getting consolidated. The free space consolidated is very important too, because if the free spaces are all broken up, then it's hard to prevent, those multiple IOs and fragmentations from occurring. So we want to make sure there's nice contiguous free space available there. Thanks, Dan.
Great, GQ. Thanks much. And there are more dashboards behind this, but we thought we'd just give you a little sense of what it is that GQ had put together. This also here, we mentioned we have a single pane of glass, the velocity management console, to kind of take a step back from what you saw previously in kind of the view of a single VM. And this kind of shows you all of the VMs that were installed on. You can see them down on the left side, and there could be hundreds or thousands of VMs that were installed on. And then across the top, it gives you the different categories at a high level of what we're displaying here on the console. And under system status there, you see the green, yellow, and red indicators. The yellow and red is not an indication of any kind of necessarily server issue. As you can tell, we're delivering a significant amount of benefit through our read caching optimization. And the yellow is really identifier saying, hey, we're doing some caching here, but you could really benefit more if you added a bit more memory to this VM to allow us to do a better job from a read caching perspective. And red is just saying, hey, you know what, there's not enough memory at all for us to even really build a cache. We can do a better job for you here on this VM, but add more memory and you'll see a benefit. And also one of the best practices too, and hopefully you are implementing this, is to set max memory on SQL, because we'll talk about that, because SQL will take all the memory that you give it. So I just wanted to briefly share with you what the Velocity Management Console displays. And along with the console, you can install Velocity on VMs. You can literally choose tens or hundreds of VMs to install Velocity on, click install, walk away, get a cup of coffee, and then come back and you'll be installed, because there is no reboot required to install us on the VM. It's pretty amazing what GQ and his team have delivered relative to the no reboot to install and to uninstall if necessary. But so you can do it on the fly. It takes minutes to install. Actually, the longest time it takes to install us is to download the software. Once it's there, it's a few mouse clicks and we're up and running for you. I wanted to share a few examples of customers here, and I'm not going to read all of these. You can read them faster than I can speak. But look at this down here, Bell Mobility. They're the Verizon of Canada. They put us on in their environment, in their SQL environment, and because we reduced 61% of their IO to SAN, we increased their SQL report queries 3x. Pretty amazing. The ASL marketing here, look at this. We reduced their batch import time by 15 hours. I mean, crazy numbers. In Creative Office, response time for SQL and other applications, 90% faster. Really pretty impressive numbers, and you can see the others here. So how do you get 2x faster SQL performance? We've talked about our DRAM caching engine, and one of the first really best practices around improving performance is to add more DRAM if necessary. We need at least 3 or 4 gigabytes of free and available memory to begin to build a cache. Of those 3 or 4 gigabytes, the first gigabyte and a half, we do not even touch. We leave that available for the OS in case it needs it. And oh, by the way, if the OS needed more and we're using some of that memory, we'll automatically flush our cache and give it back to the OS for them to use. I talked about the best practice of capping SQL's max memory so that there is memory then available for us to use. And how do I check my memory utilization? Well, one of the other dashboards in the whole software product can show you how much free memory is available and the cache that we're building. So it's really pretty simple, especially using the dashboard tools that we have. So what's next steps? Hopefully you've been asking some questions along the way, and if not, now's a good time to do that. But as I mentioned, you are going to get a not for resale copy of Velocity, a per server license for you to install in your environment. GQ mentioned that it's also very important for you to have some type of pre-installation benchmarks so that you have some success criteria against what to judge us on as to whether we're delivering benefits in your environment. So that's an important piece to do before you install Velocity, because we'll start optimizing as soon as we're installed. Now, you're going to get a single server license, but we're happy to work with you, as we've done with many other customers, to test across multiple VMs, across multiple hosts, and are more than happy to work with you and give you the appropriate software for you to accomplish that. Because again, if you recall, best practice is to install on all the VMs on a particular host. And with that, you'll see benefits across your Microsoft environment. So again, look for that email after the presentation is done. And GQ, do we have any questions out there?
We do, Dan, and just keep them coming. First one is, what about my other file servers? Outlook, Exchange. And I do want to tell you, we've been talking about SQL here. And SQL is a very sweet spot just because it's so IO intensive. But we give the same performance gains on other types of file servers. As I said, Exchange, Outlook, anything that is very IO intensive, we will give that same performance gains. And
Sure,
then,
GQ,
go ahead, Dan.
Domain controllers, web servers, GQ mentioned file servers, SharePoint. anything running Windows IO, and a significant amount of it benefits from our software.
Exactly. And then I see Philip says, why hasn't Microsoft bought your technology and rolled it into Windows? Good question, Philip. Uh, we've actually worked, I've been working with Microsoft since Windows 3.1. And actually, I helped put in the built-in defragmenter that comes in Windows. So Microsoft allows us third-party vendors to work and give this extra performance gains to the users, and we're glad that they do. Uh, but yeah, they know they have some performance limitations, and we're glad to solve it for them. Then Raphael asks, in a virtual environment, how would the software be loaded on the actual systems? Now, how we're loaded is we're not loaded on the hypervisors. We get loaded on the VMs running Windows because that's where the IOs actually originate. That's where they're getting created. And if we can optimize them right there where they're getting actually created, we're going to give you the best performance gains.
And GQ,
Now,
I'm
go
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, in GQ, actually, folks, you won't even see us on Task Manager. And if you do, it's not going to be much of anything, because GQ also has another patented technology called Invisitasking. We didn't talk about it at all, but I think it's worth mentioning here because he actually developed Invisitasking to where we use idle CPU time to do our work. So there's hardly any, if ever, any contention whatsoever with CPU utilization because of our use of idle CPU time. So pretty amazing what you've accomplished, GQ.
Thanks, Dan. And most you technically minded attendees out there might think, well, what's the difference between that and just running in the background? In the background, the scheduler will still schedule to run every now and then, but we take it a step further. We are running in the background, but when we do get scheduled, we then take a look at what resources are being used. Is there IOs still on the queue? Is there CPU usage above a certain percentage? And if so, we'll go back to sleep and look again the next time and say, okay, wait till these get down to a certain level before we run, because we want to make sure we have zero impact on your system. Okay. And then on this, along with this question from Raphael about where we're loaded, and as I indicated, we're loaded on the VMs running Windows. I had another question saying, do you need to be installed on every VM under the same host? And as Dan indicated before, we're not required. You can just run us on the single VM, and you'll get the performance gains on that VM, but you may not get the full performance gains because, as Dan indicated, you still have other VMs going through that same hypervisor, and they may be causing some slowness on that network there, on that exchange. So if we can get installed on all of them, we can get the best performance gains. In fact, as I know, Dan has had a few customers where they installed us on just a single system, the one that was giving the most problems, and they saw gains. But once they put us on all the systems, they saw those gains jump up by quite a bit. Uh, is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they were pleasantly surprised by that. I think one of them actually had some users come back to the IT department and say, "Hey, what is it you guys did? Because our applications are running 30% faster than they used to." So the IT team was really pleasantly surprised and more than happy, because those were unsolicited comments back to them.
Okay. And then here's a good question, and this one's for you, Dan, is how is this product licensed?
Oh, great. Well, sure. So it's licensed in two ways. One is per server, So that's whether it's a per VM or per physical server. And the other is what we call a host license. And as GQ mentioned, we're not installed on the host, but the host license covers all of the VMs on that particular host. And the break-even point is 7 VMs. So 7 or less, the per server model is more cost effective. But after 7 VMs, the host model is more cost effective. And another two byproduct of our software I should mention is that we actually can help you even increase VM density on a particular host. So there is also the opportunity potentially to even reduce the number of hosts in your environment because of what we're able to accomplish around IO reduction and increased VM density. Thanks, GQ.
Thanks, Dan. Uh, here's a good question, and this was uh, on from Michael on what about SQL using up all the memory? And as Dan indicated, on one of the best practices is to limit the amount of memory that SQL uses. SQL is not very smart or efficient on how it uses the the memory on your system. It will try to load all of its databases into memory, even though a lot of those databases or parts of those bases aren't even getting accessed. So if it's using it all, we're not able to use any. And one of the best practices is to go ahead and limit the amount of memory that SQL uses and allow us to use some of that. And as Dan said, at least 4 GB. Uh, limit SQL to allow us to use 4 GB, and we'll show you advantages. We had a third-party lab do some testing, and by doing that on some benchmarks, they saw a 62% transaction improvement by allowing us to use that available memory for caching. Oh, here's another good one. What about the safety of cache? What if the system crashes? And good question on that. We're a read-only cache. And what that means is the data that we have in our cache is already written out to your storage. So if the system crashes, there's no data integrity issues because it's already down in your storage. Data integrity is our top target there. So we're always looking to make sure that keeps in. Then I see, Raphael has a good question. Upon installing, is a reboot required? Normally with filter drivers, a reboot is required. Storage filter drivers, a reboot is required to uh, load those drivers. But with the latest versions, we're able to install and uninstall without a reboot. So no reboot is required to install or uninstall. Very simple process.
Really impressive, folks.
Yes.
We've had hundreds and hundreds of customers not only install but also upgrade uh, to a later release without having to reboot. And it's just unbelievable how easy it is to install our software. It just takes minutes.
Okay. And another one, I touched upon this before, but someone asked about physical systems. Does this apply to physical systems as well as virtual? And yes, it does. That IO attacks, that IO blender effect, that occurs on physical systems as well as virtual systems. And velocity works fine on physical systems. And then I got one from Michael. How does cache know when data on disk was changed? And good question there. We, since we're a filter driver, we catch all the writes going out to the storage too. So Michael, when a write goes out, we invalidate that data from cache, basically flush it out. So it's no longer in cache. So we know when the disk was changed on there. Good question. Now, Dan, I think that's, see, let me check, see if there's any other questions here. I think that's it.
Well, that's great. Good. Thanks, everybody. Great questions. Um, I hope that not only the answers to your questions were beneficial, but also the overall uh, set of information that GQ and I delivered here today around helping to improve not only SQL, but all of your Microsoft-based applications. So again, look for the email with the NFR copy of this per server license. Again, install that. Hopefully, you may have some benchmarks previous to the installation so that you can monitor and measure improvements. The dashboard, it comes as part of the software that you saw earlier, so you can pull that up after a few days to see, the benefits that we're delivering to the environment. However, we also are very happy to work with you to install across multiple VMs, across multiple hosts, all done at no charge to you, and to get the best and optimal performance within your environment. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask for one of us to get in contact with you to talk to you about your environment and optimize the potential testing that you'll be doing utilizing more than just the single NFR software. So folks, again, thank you very much for attending, for your questions, and hopefully for utilizing our patented IO reduction software in your environments. GQ, thank you for your time today and for answering the bulk of the questions there. Appreciate that.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
Thanks much. So folks, look forward to working with you, and please take advantage of that. And thanks again for attending. Have a great day.